There is a pattern in history, quiet, ruthless, mathematical. A sequence that has erased 3 global superpowers in the last 5 centuries. A pattern so precise it behaves almost like a natural law, repeating itself with eerie familiarity, as if empires share the same DNA, and the same fatal flaw. And in 2025, the United States, confident, powerful, certain of its own exceptionalism, is marching through this pattern step by step. Not approaching it. Not flirting with it. But deep inside it, like a traveler revisiting a road countless empires have walked before, just before the fall. Spain. Britain. The Soviet Union. 3 titans that reshaped the world, until the pattern consumed them. Today, America stands at stage 5. And if history is a teacher, then this isn't a warning. It's a countdown. But before we enter the spiral, you need to understand something almost no textbook tells you. Imperial collapse doesn't begin with ruins or invaders at the gates. It begins quietly. Like a hairline fracture beneath marble, unseen, unfelt, but growing. Empires don't fall because they're defeated. They fall because they exhaust themselves. Their borders stretch beyond what can realistically be defended. Their debts expand beyond what can be repaid. Their pride rises beyond what their economies can sustain. And for a while, everything still looks fine. The currency still buys things. The flag still commands fear. The institutions still make promises. But underneath, the scaffolding is rotting. Factories produce less. Elite talent leaves. Allies hedge. Enemies test limits. And the superpower, once envied, becomes dependent, on imports, on loans, on illusions. Then one day, the advantages that built the empire turn into liabilities. The global currency comes flooding back home. The giant military becomes too expensive to maintain. The empire's promises, once gospel, lose credibility. The collapse isn't cinematic. It's arithmetic. This is the reality Spain faced. Britain faced. The Soviet Union faced. And this is the reality America is stumbling toward. To see the pattern clearly, we start at the beginning. The first true global empire. Spain, 1500s, 1600s. The original template. After Columbus's arrival in the Americas, Spain suddenly stood on top of the world. They didn't just conquer land, they conquered wealth. The Aztec and Inca empires fell, and with them came access to the richest gold and silver deposits ever discovered. By 1550, Spanish galleons carried 200 tons of silver a year into Europe. By 1600, over 400 tons, almost half of the planet's silver supply. Money wasn't power. Money was Spain. The Spanish real became the world's preferred currency. Europe bent around the Madrid court. And King Philip II, ruling from 1556 to 1598, believed this river of wealth made Spain untouchable. But this was the first mistake every future empire repeated. Mistaking temporary abundance for permanent invincibility. Stage 1, Military overextension. Spain didn't maintain an empire. It tried to conquer the world. Wars against the Ottomans. Wars across Italy. Wars against France. Wars to crush the Protestant rebellion in the Netherlands. Wars against England, culminating in the disastrous Armada. Wars in the Philippines. Wars in the Americas. By the late 1500s, Spain had military obligations across 4 continents. Half of all government revenue went to military spending. And still, it was never enough. This is the first law of imperial collapse. Once you believe your power is infinite, your commitments become infinite too. Stage 2, Currency debasement. With wars eating the treasury alive, Spain turned to the ancient imperial trick, debasing the currency. Coins that were once nearly pure silver were diluted, first to 50% copper, then 75%, then barely any silver at all. The coins kept their names. They kept their stamps. But they lost their value. Merchants rejected them. Inflation erupted. Confidence evaporated. And just like modern inflationary crises, from Weimar Germany to late Soviet ruble shortages, the trust in money shattered long before the system did. Stage 3, the debt spiral. Unable to tax enough or print enough, Spain did what all empires do at this point. They borrowed relentlessly. From Italian bankers. From German financiers. From anyone who would extend credit. But borrowing only delayed collapse. Between 1557 and 1596, just 39 years, Spain declared bankruptcy 4 separate times. Each default was followed by new promises of reform, new attempts at discipline, and new spending sprees. Spain wasn't managing finances anymore. Spain was surviving from loan to loan. A pattern we've seen in dozens of modern economies, Greece, Argentina, even the US today with trillion-dollar annual deficits. Stage 4, loss of productive capacity. Here is the overlooked tragedy of Spain. They had all the gold and silver in the world, and it destroyed them. Overflowing wealth made real work feel unnecessary, even insulting. Why build ships when you could import them? Why farm when foreign grain was cheaper? Why innovate when silver paid for everything? Spain became a pass-through economy. Silver arrived from the New World, then flowed right back out to pay for imports. French wine. Italian textiles. Dutch manufactured goods. Spain was rich in metal, and poor in capabilities. And when the silver mines slowed, when Potosi and Zacatecas no longer flooded Europe with bullion, the entire Spanish system cracked overnight. Stage 5, social decay. Economies collapse first silently, then socially. As silver dwindled, poverty exploded. Crime surged. The streets of Madrid filled with beggars. Spain's brightest minds fled to more dynamic nations, France, England, the Netherlands. Those who remained were soldiers, bureaucrats, and clergy, consumers, not creators. By 1650 Spain had lost the Netherlands. By 1700, the empire still existed on maps but not in reality. From world superpower to ceremonial relic. A transformation that took less than a century. Spain was the prototype. But the world didn't learn. 3 centuries later, another empire, larger, richer, more advanced, stepped into the exact same trap. Britain believed it was immune to the laws of imperial collapse. Just like Spain. Just like the USSR. Just like America today. And what happened next would rewrite the 20th century. Britain, the second great collapse. If Spain was the prototype, Britain was the warning the world ignored. 3 centuries after Spanish decline, a new titan rose. Wealthier, more industrial, more sophisticated. The British Empire at its peak controlled 1/4 of the Earth's land. And nearly 1/5 of humanity lived under the Union Jack. The pound sterling wasn't just a currency. It was the backbone of global trade. Central banks held British bonds the way they hold US treasuries today. London wasn't just a city. It was the financial capital of the world. The Wall Street of its era. And just like Spain. Just like every empire before and after. Britain believed its dominance was permanent. But the pattern was already unfolding beneath its feet. Stage 1, military overextension. By the early 1900s, Britain had troops everywhere. India, Africa, the Middle East, the Pacific, Hong Kong, the Caribbean, Singapore, Egypt, Australia. Defending the largest empire in human history required a military presence across 6 continents. This wasn't strategy. It was inertia, an empire whose reach expanded faster than its ability to maintain it. Then came 1914. World War I ignited a decision that would seal the empire's fate. Britain could have stayed on the sidelines. Let Europe bleed itself dry. protect its empire from afar. Instead, it entered the war headfirst, willing to bankrupt itself to win. The cost of World War I exceeded $40 billion. Over $1 trillion in today's dollars. Britain became so desperate for funding that for the first time in its history, it became a debtor to the United States. The global financial center had shifted. The empire had won the war, but at a cost it could never recover from. Stage 2, Currency Debasement. Before the war, the pound sterling was as good as gold. Literally. The pound was backed by gold reserves held in the Bank of England. But wars consume gold faster than bullets. By 1920, Britain's reserves were half what they had been before the war. Yet instead of adjusting to its weakened position, Britain tried to pretend nothing had changed. In 1925, it re-established the gold standard at the old pre-war exchange rate, overvaluing the pound by as much as 20%. This was a fatal mistake. A strong pound meant British goods became too expensive. Exports collapsed. Factories closed. Unemployment soared. Economists today compare this moment to the US in the early 2000s, when the dollar's strength made American manufacturing uncompetitive, accelerating the offshoring of industry to China and Mexico. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. By 1931, the truth could no longer be hidden. Britain abandoned the gold standard. The pound lost 25% of its value overnight. The reserve currency of the world had just admitted that it could not honor its promises. Once the world doubts your currency, your empire is already dying. Stage 3, the debt spiral. Britain entered World War II still drowning in debt from World War I. The Second War cost another $120 billion. A catastrophic sum for a country whose economic engine was now sputtering. Again, Britain borrowed heavily from the United States. By 1945, it owed the US and Canada more than its entire GDP. The empire had won 2 global wars. But wars don't build empires. They bleed them. Debt became destiny. Britain could no longer afford to police, defend, or manage the world. The empire was cracking. Stage 4, Loss of Empire. The symbol of Britain's fading power came in 1947, with the loss of India. The crown jewel, the source of imperial wealth for 2 centuries. India's independence wasn't just political. It was economic. It was the moment Britain officially lost its last mechanism for financing global rule. After India, the collapse accelerated. Kenya, Ghana, Singapore, Malaysia, Egypt, Nigeria. Region after region slipped away. By 1970, the British Empire existed only as memory and nostalgia. You could still find red phone booths in London. You could still hear the royal anthem. But the empire was gone. As gone as Spain's conquistador glory. As gone as Rome's legions. As gone as every past superpower whose reach exceeded its grasp. Stage 5, Currency Collapse. After losing the empire, the pound attempted to stand on its own. It couldn't. In 1940, a single British pound was worth $4.03. By 1950, $2.80. By 1970, $2.40. By 1980, $2.30. Today, it hovers around $1.27. A steep fall for what was once the world's strongest currency. Britain maintained the symbols of power. A permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Nuclear weapons. The special relationship with the US. But symbols don't preserve empires. The United Kingdom had become a junior partner in the world order. It once dominated. Its currency was no longer the backbone of global trade. Its military no longer shaped the strategic map. Its economy no longer anchored global finance. London still sparkled. Its culture still shined. But its imperial power was over. Modern parallel, the warning to America. Spain lost dominance in less than 80 years. Britain in less than 40. The pattern isn't slow. It accelerates. Both empires believed they were unique, exceptional, eternal. Both ignored the same warning signs we see in America today. Massive military overextension. Currency manipulation. Exploding debt. Declining domestic production. Internal social fractures. A world quietly preparing alternatives. History doesn't negotiate. It doesn't make exceptions. It doesn't reward arrogance. And yet America, like Britain and Spain before it, believes the rules do not apply. But the pattern is not ideological. It is mathematical. Once stage 5 begins, stage 6 follows. And stage 6 is when the collapse becomes irreversible. Before we reach that, though, we must examine the third example. The most dramatic, the fastest, the most shocking. The Soviet Union. A superpower that collapsed not in decades, but in 900 days. What you're about to see is how rapidly the seventh stage can arrive. When a superpower pretends it still has time. The Soviet Union, the superpower that imploded from within. If Spain was the long fall, and Britain the dignified decline, the Soviet Union was the explosion. A superpower erased not by war or invasion, but by the gravitational pull of economic reality. From 1945 to 1991, the USSR was the only nation on Earth capable of rivaling the United States. They had nuclear weapons. They had global influence. They had satellites in orbit. They had millions of soldiers. The largest tank armies in history. And an ideology that promised to reshape the human future. Western leaders feared them. Developing nations admired them. Even the US intelligence agencies believed the Soviet model might outlast capitalism. Yet behind the concrete walls, beneath the parades and propaganda, the Soviet economy was collapsing quietly. Rotting from within with the same 5 stages that Spain and Britain had suffered before them. By the time anyone saw the truth, it was already too late. Stage 1, Military Overextension. The Soviet Union didn't just maintain a military. It fed one. Where America spent around 5 to 6% of GDP on defense during the Cold War, the Soviets spent 15–20%. 3 to 4 times as much relative to their economy. Why? Because the USSR believed survival required matching the United States everywhere. On every battlefield. In every technological race. In every proxy war. If the US built a new missile, the Soviets built 2. If the US launched a satellite, the Soviets launched their own. If America supported West Germany, the Soviets propped up East Germany. Poland, Hungary, Cuba, Vietnam, Syria, Ethiopia, Angola. This was empire through ideology. But economically, it was suicide. By the 1980s, the Soviet state wasn't managing its economy. It was sacrificing it on the altar of military competition. Factories rusted. Infrastructure broke down. Civilian goods were scarce. But tanks rolled off assembly lines like clockwork. The USSR was winning militarily. And losing economically. A contradiction that no nation can sustain. Not Rome. Not Britain. Not America today. Stage 2, Economic Stagnation. While the West experienced the post-war boom, the Soviet economy slowed, then froze. Central planning, once seen as a miracle, became a bureaucratic labyrinth. Factories met quotas by producing useless goods. Farms failed despite possessing some of Earth's best farmland. Innovation evaporated because reward didn't exist. The black market became the real economy. Lines for bread stretched around blocks. By the 1970s, the only thing keeping the Soviet Union alive was oil. High oil prices in the 1970s masked the underlying decay, just as credit bubbles mask stagnation in modern economies. Then in the 1980s, global oil prices collapsed. The revenue that held the system together evaporated almost overnight. It was Spain's silver collapse all over again. A single resource propping up an entire empire. And when it faltered, the illusion shattered. Stage 3, currency collapse. The ruble was never a real currency. At least not by international standards. It could not be exchanged globally. It wasn't backed by trust. Only by government decree. Even Soviet citizens preferred US dollars when they could get them. Dollars bought imported goods. Rubles bought whatever the state managed to produce. To trade with other countries, the Soviet government had to use gold or oil. Because no one wanted the ruble. By 1985, oil prices crashed. Gold reserves were nearly gone. And the Soviet Union was running out of the only forms of money the outside world accepted. Financially, the USSR was suffocating. A superpower with nuclear missiles. But no functioning currency. History has a word for this. Terminal phase. Stage 4, loss of empire. Empires depend on wealth. When the wealth disappears, the empire dissolves. In 1989, after decades of stagnation, Eastern Europe erupted. Poland, Hungary, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria. One by one, the satellite states that had formed the Soviet sphere of influence broke away. The Berlin Wall, the symbol of a divided world, fell in November 1989. The Soviet Union could have sent troops to stop it. In 1956, it had crushed Hungary. In 1968, it crushed Czechoslovakia. But in 1989, it did nothing. Why? Because it couldn't afford to. Because the military was underpaid. Because the economy was crumbling. Because the Soviet system was too weak to enforce its own empire. A superpower on paper. A hollow empire in reality. Stage 5, complete collapse. What followed remains the fastest collapse of any major empire in modern history. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. No invasion. No civil war. No nuclear exchange. No external overthrow. It simply ran out of money. Government salaries went unpaid. The ruble became worthless. The military fractured. Republics declared independence one after another. From the fall of the Berlin Wall to the death of the Soviet Union took just 900 days. The world woke up to find that one of the most powerful nations ever created had vanished. It didn't fall. It imploded. Just like Spain. Just like Britain. The pattern. Overextension, currency weakening, debt, loss of productive capacity. Social-economic fracture, collapse. Had repeated itself with almost mechanical precision. Modern parallel, the United States enters stage 5. And here is where the pattern becomes terrifying. Spain took decades to fall. Britain took about 40 years. The Soviet Union took less than 3. Each collapse has grown faster. Because the complexity of empire has grown faster. Which brings us to the United States. A nation that now sits in the middle of stage 5. Like the USSR. The US is militarily overextended. Like Britain. Its currency is stretched beyond its foundation. Like Spain. Its productive base has been hollowed out. And like all three. It believes it is immune to history. But the pattern doesn't care about belief. It only cares about math. And math says. The US is already deep into the collapse sequence. In Part 4. We will walk through that sequence step by step. The overextension, the currency debasement, the debt spiral. The collapse of domestic production. And the social fracture now visible in America's cities, politics, and economy. The US has already passed the halfway point. The final two stages, loss of reserve currency status, and sudden collapse, are next. And historically, once a superpower reaches stage 5, the fall is faster than anyone expects. The United States, the empire at stage 5. Now we come to the part of the pattern that feels less like history and more like the present. The three previous superpowers, Spain, Britain, the USSR, all made the same fatal decisions. They overextended. They weakened their currency. They drowned in debt. They lost their productive engines. Their societies fractured. And then the collapse hit. The US, right now, has completed the first 5 steps. With astonishing speed. Empires fall in the same order. Because empires grow in the same order. And today, the United States is standing exactly where those fallen giants once stood. Believing it is different. Believing it is immune. Believing the rules of history don't apply. But history doesn't care about belief. It cares about patterns. Let's walk through them. Not hypothetically. But with America's current numbers. Current policies. Current realities. Stage 1, military overextension. Spain fought on 4 continents. Britain defended 6. The Soviets tried to counter America everywhere. The US. It surpasses all of them. 750+ military bases in 80 countries. Troops deployed in over 150 countries. Defense partnerships with Europe, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, Australia, Israel, and dozens more. This is not an alliance network. It is a global policing operation. The annual Pentagon budget is $850 billion. More than the next 10 nations combined. And yet, military leadership openly admits. The US cannot fight 2 major wars simultaneously. China threatens Taiwan. Russia pushes into Europe. Iran pressures the Middle East. North Korea destabilizes Asia. America has promised to defend all of these fronts. But like Spain's empire in 1580, and Britain's empire in 1914, the commitments exceed the capacity. The map looks impressive. The numbers do not. Overextension. The first crack in every empire. Stage 2, currency debasement. Spain diluted its silver. Britain overvalued its pound. The Soviets printed valueless rubles. America's version began in 1971. When Nixon ended the gold standard. And turned the dollar into pure fiat. Since then, the money supply has exploded. Up 400% since 2000. Up $6 trillion since 2020. Dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1971. The US isn't mixing copper into coins. It's printing trillions electronically. A different mechanism. The same outcome. When money becomes unlimited, value becomes uncertain. The world doesn't trust currencies forever. Not Roman denarii. Not Spanish silver. Not British pounds. Not Soviet rubles. And not dollars. And quietly, nations have started to hedge. Because they know stage 6 begins. The moment the world stops believing. Stage 3, the debt spiral. This is where empires seal their fate. The U.S. national debt, $36 trillion. That's 120% of GDP. A number historically associated with collapse. Annual interest payments are approaching $1 trillion a year. More than the U.S. spends on the military. Think about that. America now spends more simply paying for past spending than it does projecting power across the world. Deficits continue every single year. Even in peacetime. Even in economic growth. Even when tax revenue hits records. This is not budgeting. This is triage. Spain defaulted 4 times. Britain drowned under war debts. The USSR ran out of hard currency. Debt is not a side problem. It is the mechanism of collapse. Once interest becomes the largest line item, the end is already in motion. Stage 4, loss of productive capacity. If you want to know why empires fall, look at what they make. Spain imported everything. Britain lost industry. The USSR produced weapons but not consumer goods. The United States, today, is the same. For decades, factories closed. Jobs moved overseas. And the country transformed. From a manufacturing superpower into a consumption superpower. The result. America imports $800 billion more than it exports. Nearly all electronics come from Asia. 90% of antibiotics come from China. 70% of semiconductors come from Taiwan. Even military components rely on foreign supply chains. This is not a resilient system. This is a fragile one. The same fragility that destroyed Spain when silver shipments slowed. The same fragility that weakened Britain when global trade shifted to the US. The same fragility that strangled the Soviet economy when oil prices collapsed. A nation that no longer makes things cannot sustain empire. It can only rent it. With debt. Stage 5, social decay. This is the stage people feel in their daily lives. Decline stops being theoretical. It becomes emotional. Visible. Inescapable. America in 2025 mirrors. Spain in 1600. Britain in 1945. The USSR in 1985. The signs. Trust in institutions at record lows. Crime rising in major cities. Homeless encampments spreading. Polarization reaching civil war levels. Drug overdoses killing 100,000 annually. Fertility collapsing below replacement. Infrastructure aging and failing. Young talent leaving the country or disengaging. Political chaos making governance impossible. Every empire reaches this stage. And believes it is temporary. It never is. Social decay is the smoke. That signals the fire beneath. You cannot be a world superpower abroad when you are fractured at home. The US is at stage 5, next is the point of no return. Spain reached stage 5. And never recovered. Britain reached stage 5. And became America's junior partner. The Soviet Union reached stage 5. And dissolved within 3 years. The US is now here. At the same threshold. Stage 6 is the loss of the global reserve currency. Stage 7 is the sudden collapse. In Part 5, we will confront those final stages. The moment when foreign nations stop holding dollars. When US debt becomes unpayable. When the currency comes flooding home. When the empire's strength evaporates almost overnight. Collapse doesn't happen slowly. The warning signs do. The final break is always fast. And right now, America is standing on the edge. The final two stages, where empires cease to be. We have reached the final arc of the pattern. The last two steps in the seven-stage collapse sequence. The steps no empire has ever reversed. Not Spain. Not Britain. Not the Soviets. And now, the United States stands closer to these stages than at any point in its history. These final stages don't unfold slowly. They arrive like earthquakes. Quiet until the instant everything breaks. If the first 5 stages are decline, the last 2 are destruction. And they always begin with the same trigger. The collapse of the global reserve currency. Stage 6, loss of reserve currency status. This is the moment when the world stops trusting your money. For Spain, trust died when silver coins were diluted. For Britain, trust died when it left the gold standard in 1931. For the Soviet Union, trust never existed. For the United States, the dollar's superpower status is built on 3 pillars. 1. Global trade uses dollars. 2. Central banks store dollars. 3. Nations trust U.S. treasuries as safe collateral. When these pillars weaken, the empire weakens with them. And right now, all 3 are shifting. BRICS nations are developing alternatives. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Many now trade in local currencies or gold-backed agreements. China and Russia have abandoned the dollar in bilateral trade. The yuan and ruble are replacing the dollar in energy contracts, military agreements, and commodities. Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the petrodollar, is accepting yuan for oil, ****. This is not symbolic. This is seismic. For 50 years, global oil was priced exclusively in dollars. Break that pillar, and the dollar becomes just another currency. Not the currency. Central banks worldwide are buying gold at record levels. Not dollars. Not euros. Not yen. Why gold? Because gold is the currency of collapse. The asset nations run toward. When they sense an empire's money is weakening, countries are reducing dollar reserves. Out of caution, not rebellion. They know what happens when a reserve currency cracks. It cascades. Just as British pounds flooded back into Britain in the 1960s. Just as silver drained out of Spain in the 1600s. Dollars will eventually come rushing home. And when they do, the US money supply will inflate violently, even without printing. Simply because global dollars will no longer be absorbed abroad. This is how reserve currencies die. Not overnight, but suddenly. The moment the world realizes it no longer needs to hold your money. Your empire is no longer a global empire. It becomes regional. Then vulnerable. Then irrelevant. And that leads to the final stage. Stage 7, sudden collapse. The 7th stage is always the same. Not a slow decline. Not a graceful retirement. A violent snap. Spain's collapse accelerated when the silver shipments fell. Britain's collapse accelerated when the pound lost trust. The Soviet Union collapsed when it ran out of hard currency. The United States will face a similar chain reaction. 1. A currency crisis. Dollars flood home as foreign nations diversify. Inflation spikes. Import costs explode. Global markets panic. 2. A debt crisis. Interest rates jump. Treasury auctions struggle. The U.S. cannot roll over its debt cheaply. Interest payments exceed defense spending, even exceed Social Security. 3. A political crisis. The public turns on institutions. States fight over federal authority. Social resentment erupts. Confidence in the system evaporates. 4. An economic shock. Supply chains break. Unemployment surges. Banks tighten lending. Credit, the bloodstream of the modern economy, clots. 5. A legitimacy crisis. The government loses the ability to project order. Foreign allies distance themselves. Adversaries seize the moment. Empires rarely fall to enemies. They fall to arithmetic. And arithmetic is ruthless. This is why the Soviet Union collapsed in 900 days. Why Britain fell from world leader to junior partner in just 20 years. Why Spain lost its empire within a single century. And why the United States, already in stage 5, may face the same trajectory. Compressed by modern finance, global interconnection, and decades of political paralysis. Once the reserve currency is lost, collapse becomes a countdown. The pattern is non-negotiable. Spain believed it was different. Britain believed it was different. The Soviet Union believed it was different. All of them were wrong. Today, Americans repeat the same mantras. We're America. We have the strongest military. We have the dollar. We have technology. But the pattern doesn't care. It doesn't care about pride. It doesn't care about slogans. It doesn't care about exceptionalism. It doesn't care about who sits in Congress or the White House. The pattern obeys only mathematics. You cannot borrow infinitely. You cannot print infinitely. You cannot police the world infinitely. You cannot hollow out your industrial base infinitely. You cannot fracture socially indefinitely. Once you reach stage 5, stage 6 and 7 follow. Not because the world hates you, but because the math stops working. Outro, can America break the pattern? Here is the uncomfortable truth. Maybe there is a way out. Maybe America can break the pattern. Maybe it can do what Spain, Britain, and the Soviets couldn't. Reform. Rebuild. Reshore industry. Reduce debt. Reunite socially. Reclaim fiscal discipline. Restore internal resilience. Maybe. But the pattern says otherwise. The math says otherwise. And history, which has watched empires rise and fall for 5,000 years, suggests America is sprinting toward the same cliff. Every past superpower tumbled over. If you understand the sequence, you understand the end. And the end is never slow. It is always sudden. When stage 6 arrives. When the dollar cracks. When the world stops holding the US together financially. You will want to know what happened. Why it happened. And what comes next. Because the answers aren't hiding in the future. They are written in the past. And the pattern, the same one that destroyed Spain, Britain, and the USSR, is unfolding again. This time. In real time. History is not just a sequence of dates. It is a mirror. A cold, polished mirror. That shows empires what they truly are. Beneath the myths they tell themselves. And when America looks into that mirror today, the reflection staring back is not Rome at its peak. Not the US in 1945. Not the triumphant liberal order of the 1990s. It is Spain in 1590. Britain in 1914. The Soviet Union in 1985. Superpowers convinced they were permanent. Just decades before they were gone. This is the part people struggle with. Empires always fall faster than they rise. Spain collapsed in 80 years. Britain collapsed in 40. The USSR collapsed in 900 days. America, more complex, more interconnected. More leveraged, more indebted. Will move through the final stages. Even faster. That is the nature of globalized power. Speed magnifies success and accelerates decline. The illusion of exceptionalism. Every empire believes it is exceptional. Spain believed the silver would never run out. Britain believed the sun would never set. The Soviets believed their ideology would outlast capitalism. America believes its technology and military guarantee permanence. But exceptionalism is the final illusion. The protective myth empires cling to when they have run out of structural strength. Exceptionalism tells them, we're different. We're smarter. We're richer. We're chosen. It won't happen here. But the pattern does not bend to belief. The math does not negotiate. And the math is now overwhelming. Debt accelerating faster than GDP. Interest surpassing defense spending. Currency debasement as policy. Hollowed out manufacturing. Strategic overextension. Social atomization. Global diversification away from the dollar. Individually, these are challenges. Together, they are the pattern. Together, they are fatal. The moment before collapse is always calm. Look back through history and you'll find something eerie. The year before collapse always feels normal. Before Spain's default, people still drank wine in Madrid. Before Britain abandoned the gold standard, London cafes were full. Before the Soviet Union disintegrated, malls in Moscow still sold Christmas ornaments. The calm is deceptive. It is the eye of the hurricane. The signs are present. But society has normalized them. Economic stress. Temporary. Political division. Overblown. Currency manipulation. Necessary. Debt levels. Manageable. Decline in trust. Just partisanship. Every empire pretends that the early rumblings of collapse are just noise. Until the ground gives way. The pattern doesn't care about who you vote for. Another illusion. That collapse is political. That if the right party wins. If taxes are adjusted. If policies shift slightly left or right. The trajectory will change. But the pattern isn't partisan. Spain collapsed under kings. Britain collapsed under conservatives and labor governments. The Soviet Union collapsed under communists. Leadership matters. But math matters more. No leader in history has ever reversed runaway debt. Weakening currency. Military overextension. Shrinking productive capacity. Social fragmentation. Global loss of confidence. Not because they couldn't. But because by the time the problems are visible, they are no longer fixable. Collapse is not a political crisis. It is a structural one. Can the United States escape? Possibly. America has strengths no previous empire possessed. The world's deepest financial markets. Massive natural resources. Immense geographical insulation. Technological dominance. A still innovative entrepreneurial culture. A population that, despite division, remains capable of reinvention. In theory, America could break the pattern. It could rebuild industry. It could reduce military commitments. It could rebalance trade. It could cut deficits. It could regain social cohesion. It could restore credibility. But here is the darker truth. No empire has ever chosen reform over denial. Not one. Spain didn't slow its wars. Britain didn't abandon empire early. The Soviets didn't liberalize their economy in time. And the US, since 2020, has accelerated every stage. Printed more money in 3 years than in the previous century. Expanded military obligations even as capabilities shrink. Pushed debt to historic highs. Experienced the fastest social polarization in modern history. Watched allies diversify away from the dollar. Lost control over supply chains. Increased dependence on adversarial nations. Empires rarely reverse course. Because reversal requires sacrifice. Real sacrifice. Before the crisis hits. And democracies, like monarchies and communist states before them, avoid sacrifice until it is forced upon them. By then, the clock has already run out. The math of collapse. Let's strip everything down. Politics, ideology, emotion. And look only at the math. A nation cannot run deficits forever. A reserve currency cannot be printed without limit. A military cannot defend a world it no longer controls. A society cannot remain united under rising inequality, distrust, and decay. A debt burden cannot grow faster than the economy that supports it. A global order cannot survive when allies hedge and adversaries coordinate. These are not opinions. These are laws. Economic, social, historical laws. That have never been broken. The US is not collapsing because it is America. It is collapsing because it is an empire. And empires collapse in predictable ways. The final message: read the past to survive the future. If this documentary opened your eyes, then understand one final truth. When stage 6 hits, when the dollar cracks, when the debt spirals, when the social fabric tears, people will say, "No one saw this coming." But it's written everywhere. In textbooks. In archives. In the debris of ancient capitals. In the ruins of fallen governments. In the silence of collapsed currencies. In the stories of Spain, Britain, the USSR. The answers aren't hidden in tomorrow. They're carved into yesterday. And if you know the pattern, you know what's coming next. History isn't repeating. History is teaching. And America, whether it knows it or not, is sitting in the classroom for the final lesson.